Welcome to our second video on Java programming. My name is Nate Nestler, and this is for Hyperactive Studios. Okay, so let's go ahead and set up another project. All right, so if we go here to File, okay, New Project, and let's create a circle project. Let's call it like Very Basic Circle, I guess. All right, it's a very basic circle. Okay, and then I'm going to say Finish on this. And we get a very basic circle. We get our package, we get our class, and we get our main function, just like we did before. I'm just going to go and paste in some code I wrote up ahead of time. And it automatically notices that I have told it that I have a JOptionPane.showMessage dialog. And it automatically put the import statement in there. In order to make this do this, if you right click on a piece of code like this, you can say fix imports and it'll automatically insert the import that's needed for whatever it is you're coding. And that's exactly what it just did just now in here. So it said import space javax.swing.jOptionPane because the jOptionPane is part of the Swing library. And this is all part of the graphical version of Java. So the cool thing about this little program, let me just show you what it looks like right now. If I run this, wrong one, that's the one from before. So yeah, you need to go to your project now, very basic circle, right click on it and say set as main project. If you can't get the set main project as main project here from your right click, then go to run and then go to set main project here and go down to very basic circle and set it that way. Okay, so with that said and done, we now have a very basic circle. And our project's now set so that when we go to run it, it's going to run the circle one and not the other one. So if I say a radius of, say, like, I don't know, 5.5, it'll come back and it will do another pop-up and tell me the radius is 5.5, but the area of the circle is 95.033104 units. So there we go. So that's how our program works. And we had these little cool graphical pop-ups. We didn't have that before. We just had just command line before. But now I'm showing you how to do it graphically. I'll also show you how to do it through command line too. I'll tell you what, let's do it. Let's get rid of the graphical part of it for now. I was like, no, I like the graphical. It's pretty. I know, it is pretty. It is awesome. But let's hide it for now. And then we'll move back to it here a little later. I promise. So let's hide this one too, like so. So I just commented out those two lines of code. Now the computer no longer sees it. And I'm going to bring back this code here. So this is a command line version. And immediately I get an error. And the reason I'm getting an error is, well, because basically this whole scanner thing, it doesn't know about it. It needs it. So if I right click on it and say fix imports, it will automatically go in and do the JavaUtil and also remove the other one because I no longer have it available because I commented it out. And then I'll need to uncomment that also. Okay. So let's break down this program. First, I'm going to create a constant. The way to create a constant inside of Java is to say final in front of it. So if I say final space double here, this makes it a double versus a float. It's basically a real number. A double is double the size in bits that a float is in memory. It means I can have a much larger, bigger precision number, basically. Here I'm going to name my constant, and by convention is to make your constants all caps. And if it has to be multiple words, you put underscores between the words. And that's typically how we do that. When you get to underscore, you say shift, and it's right next to your plus equals key, next to your backspace key. So you'll see it there. Or a better way to say it's next to your 0 key at the top row of numbers at the top of your keyboard. You hit shift and you hit that little underscore symbol there. It'll put an underscore in there. Okay. And we're going to say it's equal to 3.14159 semicolon. That's enough pi numbers as far as I'm concerned. You could make it longer if you wanted to, whatever. That's what's going on there. We're going to do the double for the radius. Since we're doing pi as a double, we want the radius to be a double. Our full area could just be a float if we want, or we could make it a double. It's really up to us how we want it. But if we do our area as a float, and I did this as a way of showing what happens if you make things not match and how to get around that. And we have a boolean here, is on, semicolon, which we'll use, and then char here, letter equals y. Now, I don't think we actually ended up using that in this particular program. I was using that with another example, so I'll tell you what, let me remove these real quick. Well, basically this is a way of saying true or false. That's what boolean is. So I have like is on here, this is for true or false. And a char here, I was just doing this as a demonstration of how you could do the different data types for different variables. A char would be like a single character, like yes or no, or y or n, basically. And you put your single characters like this with single quotes around the character, semicolon. And when I'm doing a radius, here I want to assign a value. If it's going to be a double, I need to come in here and I need to say that if I want to assign 5 as a real number and a decimal, it's going to be a decimal number, right? That's what double and floats are. They're decimal numbers. It doesn't mean that it has to be like 0. Blah, 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 blah. It could be like 5.5, for instance, or something of that nature. But if I put a D here, it lets it know that this number is a double number. It's getting assigned to it. And yes, this thing is correct. It's a number that never gets used because it always gets replaced. Here for a radius. So that is whatever. The 5 here is a double though. So it'd be like saying 5.0000. But the computer doesn't have a way of knowing the difference between a float and a double. Is that a float 5 or is it a double 5? So we say D for double, F for float, I for integer, C for character. Single character, but you have single quotes around the character, so you don't need to say that. So, and string uses double quotes. So, like before, I showed you, this would be a string. It uses double quotes for a string. String would be like a sentence, like a whole list of characters. More than one of these characters use double quotes, like this. When it's a single character, you use single quotes, like this, on each side of it. And char just means short for character. All right. So our radius variable is equal to 5D, semicolon, and scanner space input equals new scanner, open parentheses, system.in, close parentheses, semicolon. Okay, what is this? Well, this is a special type, a data type. It's like an object, and scanner. It scans your keyboard to see what you're typing in, and that's what that data type is. We're going to create a variable for it, though, called input, because someone's going to be inputting something into our program from the keyboard. So we called it input. It's going to be equal to a new scanner. And what does this mean? Well, scanner here, when we say new on this means to create new memory. This is creating new memory while the program is running. So while the program is running, this is going to be created. And it gets added to what's called a heap and not stack on memory. Heap basically is variables being created while the program is running. So we're not creating this ahead of time before the program runs. We're actually creating this on the fly while the program is running. So we don't use this memory until we need it, basically. So when we say new here, we need to create new memory. And we need to create the memory that's the right size for our variable. It needs to match it. So we tell the computer that it needs to be the size of a scanner object. And so it goes, okay, so in that case, scanner object in memory is going to take up this much space. And I'm going to have system.in in here so I know that's input. It needs to take that much memory. And then that gets assigned back for our input variable here so that it takes the right amount of space, exactly the right amount of space in memory in the computer. And so that's what this new is all about. We're creating a new variable in memory on the fly while the program is running. And we're creating the right size, right amount of memory for our new variable. And that's what the new scanner is all about right here, creating the right size of memory. System in is because we're going to be taking input from the system. This is a standard library. I'm not going to get into it, but basically we're telling it we're going to be doing input to the computer. Now, semicolon at the end of this. System.out.print here is going to display the message. So enter the radius here, colon, space, close quotes, close parentheses, semicolon. And that's going to display the message, enter the radius on the screen, just like we did hello world. Then if I say radius is equal to input.getNext double, open close parentheses, semicolon, means the next double that is typed in on the keyboard, and then when they hit enter, it finalizes that, is going to get stored into the variable called radius. And then we have area here equals, in parentheses, float, close parentheses. This does what's called typecasting. Now notice that radius is a double here, but area is a float. So this is a problem. We cannot have radius be a double and area be a float. You get a type mismatch when you go to assign this. So we can temporarily, though, convert a radius into a float for just this single operation. And the way we do that is by putting parentheses around float in front of our radius here, and it converts a radius into a float for this particular operation. So then we say radius times radius, which would be radius squared, and we make it a float also, and we multiply that times pi, which we also temporarily make a float because it was a double, semicolon, and then the resulting value will be a float that gets assigned to area. And there you go. So very cool when we get the area of a circle. Then I create a message variable, and I make it of type string. So that way I can store a message in it. So in this case, it'd be in quotes here, the radius is space, close quotes, plus radius. And it's going to display what the radius is. And then I can say, add on to my message, I can say plus equal. This is the same thing if I were to say message equals message plus, and then this whole thing right here. So that's the same thing. But this is kind of longer and more redundant, so we have a shortcut for it in programming. We just say plus equals. It keeps us from having to say message equals message plus. And then that way we can have a short version of it. So it's the same thing right here. I'm just going to comment that out so it doesn't get executed. But that's the same thing right there. So essentially what this does is plus does what's called concatenation, where it takes your sentence or your string here and then adds it to the variable. In this case, the number. It's going to take that number and automatically convert it into a string. So it's going to take this number and put it as a string number in this sentence. And then we're going to continue on with our sentence by adding on this sentence. So it's like taking a sentence and sticking it onto another sentence. So it'll end up saying like the radius is 95.3454, whatever. The area of the circle is, and then whoever the area of the circle is. So, you know, as far as that goes. And be whatever value is stored inside of area. And then we display our message by saying system.out.println message. And we just say the message variable, and all the text that's stored inside of our string or variable called message will get displayed on the screen. So let's have a look at this and let's watch it happen. And so some of that probably didn't make sense to you while I was going over it, but let's step through it in code and see it happening live and see what's going on as it gets executed. And then things will make a whole lot more sense. So I'm going to say debug. Okay. So I'm going to go to my output here, or I can see my variables too. Either way. Whatever works out best. Let me get rid of some of these other ones that I have from these other programs. All right. And I can look at my variables here. Now, inside my variables, I can see a couple of things happening. I can see my radius, which has nothing happening yet. Pi hasn't been created yet. So as I step over that, we're going to get a few things happen here. We have radius, we have a float for area, but nothing's been assigned to any of these. But the moment I say step over a radius like this, our radius is now a double and it has a value of a 5. And this is from some other program, so I don't need to store some of this stuff anymore. Yeah. Okay. And there's our radius. So it's now 5. And if I take the scanner input and it gets created, step over, you'll see radius here is 5 and input is 5. I don't even need to store that. It's a double like that. And we have our object called scanner, and it takes up a lot more space in memory. I'll show you what I'm talking about. See, it has all the stuff in it. It has a buffer, has position, has a matcher, has a pattern, has all the stuff. So that's why we had to say new on it in order to take up all the space in memory so we could store the whole thing. Otherwise, it just wasn't going to fit. You notice it's not small like a radius is. Radius, you don't have to have a drop down on it because radius is just a number. So it's very small. It takes very little RAM to store it. But input is a whole beast here, and you need to store the whole monster-sized, basically, object here in memory. And it's got a lot of different parts to it, so all that stuff needs to get stored into RAM. And that's why we needed to create a new for it to create that space in RAM to make enough room for our input variable. Alright. Here on system out, here it's going to display it, this message. So when I say step over to the next, on my output, I get enter the radius. And then when I say input next double here and step over that, it's going to prompt me to type in a number. So if I say something like 6 and then enter, it now takes in that as the radius. So notice the radius is now 6 as a double. Okay, awesome. And it automatically made it a double because I said next double. So I made it say grab whatever is typed next as a double. And that's what it did. So it turned my 6 into a double. I didn't have to, as the person typing it in, tell the computer that's a double. Instead, when I wrote the code up for my programming, I told it to look for a double. And that's what it's doing when someone types in something. So that's what the dot next double is all about here. And then we assign that to our radius. Now we need to compute our area. So note that our pi is 3.14159 as a double. Our radius is 6.0 as a double. And so we're multiplying 6 times 6, which would be 36, and times 3.14159, blah, blah, blah. And that'll be like 100 and something, basically, for our area. And these are all getting converted into floats, because again, the area is a float and not a double. So I must type these as a float temporarily so that this calculation can be done and stored correctly into area and we don't get an error. So if I say step over at this point, what will happen is that my area here is type float and it stores the number 113.097244. Now we need to compose our message variable. So we're going to create the radius is, and it's going to generate this. And I'll show you what I'm talking about when concatenating it. So I say step over it. You'll notice we now have a new message variable. It's a type string, and it says the radius is 6.0. Oh, well, look at that. Well, check it out. Radius was 6.0 in the memory of the variable radius. And so it took that 6.0 and just tacked it on and put it as text. So now it says 6.0 as text inside the string. No longer represents an actual number. but it displays it as a number, as our string. So I couldn't take this, for instance, and do a mathematical operation with it now because it's part of the string. And Java's smart and automatically does that for us. Some other languages, you would have to convert that, but in Java, you don't have to do it. You just say plus on it, and automatically adds it to the end of your string. Now we need to add the rest of the string here. So when I say plus equals here, it's going to add the area of the circle is onto the end of this string here. And so this message is going to get quite a bit longer when we add the rest of this text to it. And we do that by saying the plus equal here. So if I say step over it, you now have the radius is 6.0, the area of the circle is 13.097244. And you see it makes this whole string now. And so that's what that plus equal is about. And don't forget, we also had area plus area at the end of our string here. And that's where that number came from the area variable that we have right here. Notice it's 13.097244. And that's what we have going on over here. Awesomeness. Okay, so that composes that entire sentence. And now we're just going to display this string, this whole sentence. So now that we got this whole sentence, we just need to display it onto the screen. And we do that with the system.out.println. Just like we did hello world, we're going to have it print that string message there. So I step over that, go to my output, I get the radius is 6.0 and the area of the circle is 13.097244. And it now displays it onto the screen. And that's our basic little program. All right, so let's look at how to do it graphically, and then we'll be done with it. So our program's done running. So that was how we do it through command line. Now let's take a different look at it, and let's look at how can we do it graphically. So exact same thing, really. It's just that we're going to change things up a little bit. So one of the things I'm going to do is come in here and now hide this command line variation of it. And I don't need to do the input part of the scanner. And I also don't need to do command line output of it. But I do need to come in here and say J option pane needs to be displayed. And of course we're getting an error. If I right click on my J option pane, I say fix imports. It's going to fix and update this right here, and then now we have javax.swing.jOptionPane semicolon. It got rid of our scanner one because we're not using it anymore. So we're not importing that library, which means we're not taking up more computer resources because we don't need it anymore. And then the other thing we're going to need is this radius one. So let me just break down this new code we're adding. It's not much here really. And one of them is this radius right here, equals double dot parse double. Alright, so what does that mean? Well, problem is when people type into one of these pop-up boxes or whatever, it comes back as a string. And again, like I said before, when it's a number, it can't be calculated as a text. So like 6.0 inside of quotes, it's not the same thing as 6.0 as a double. They're two different things. The text version is just like writing it on the board. It's not going to make it mathematical. It's not going to get computed. So we need to turn it from something that's just being displayed into something that can be actually computed. And that's what this double dot parse double is. It takes the string text, automatically reads in that string, and then converts the numbers in it from a string into an actual real number. In this case, a double number. You can do this with other ones too, like integer dot parse integer or parse int. Sorry, and you could also say float dot parse float, so on and so forth. Inside the parentheses here. And this will do that for anything that's inside of its parentheses. So inside the parentheses, I have this J option pane. J option pane is the pop-up box that displays the message to the screen. The first one to type something in. So I have the J option pane. I'm telling it dot show input dialog. So this is a type of J option pane. And this is for the input dialog. This is different than when we're just displaying the output, which would be a show message dialog. So we can have different dialogs with our J option panes. But basically, these are pop-up windows. J option panes are pop-up windows, and then we have different types of pop-up windows, and we can specify it by saying dot which kind we want. In this case, we want a dot show input dialog, and then inside of our parentheses here, we need to say what message we want to say. So we say quotes here for a string, and we say enter the radius. In the quotes, in the parentheses, in the other parentheses, semicolon. And the way this program code works is it does what's inside the parentheses first, and then does outside of that. So we pass in enter the radius, it's going to do this J option pane show input dialog first, because it's inside of these other parentheses. Then it's going to get the input back from the user, it's going to return that value, and then it's going to get stored, and then it's going to parse it into a number, as a double number, and then it's going to get stored into radius. Then we're going to do our computation for our area, then we're going to create our string, and then we're going to display our string over here in our J option pane dot show message dialog, where it just does a pop-up, open parentheses, null, semicolon, comma, nor the null for now. Just put it in there. I have to have it. I'm not getting into it right now. Actually, technically, you can position things on the screen. That's what null's about. I'm not getting into that, though. By default here, if you just put null here, it'll position in the center of the screen, which is what we want, and it puts us in exactly where we need it to be. So just put null for there. And then we're going to put our text to be displayed here. So we just pass it message for our text string, and it will display our whole entire message here. So let's go ahead and run this, but with debug mode, so we can see this again in an instant replay. So let's go ahead and click this to create another breakpoint, and I'm going to say debug. Okay, so we have our final double here, pi equals. We get the whole enchilada there. I'm just going to skip all that, and now it exists in memory. So if I look at my variables here, we can see, is there any way I can make these disappear up there? Yes, thank you. And now, hold on, sorry. Yeah, that works for me. Okay. Alright. So step over this, and radius now exists. And radius is a double of 5 here. Cool. So it's a way of me hiding the other ones that I didn't want to see anymore. Just unclick this right here. And then area here is going to get computed. But before I can get computed on the area here, we're going to assign the radius based on this show dialog pane here. Now I could dive into this and see inside of it if I liked. We get our pop-up dialog. And notice it says enter the radius. Notice what we passed in was enter the radius. There, like so. And now it's hiding somewhere, which is very annoying. So let's enter in our radius. Let's say it's 5 here. Say OK to that. Alright. And then it comes into our parse double. This is inside of Java's code. And it takes that floating decimal and reads it in and converts it to a double value. And I'm just going to step over this so that it comes back. So that's what that double dot parse double just did. So it took that result, came back, and you'll notice radius is now 5 because it took that string text that came back from there when I typed in 5 and converted it into an actual number. If I step over to the next one, it's going to be area. Now when I step over this, it's going to be radius times radius, which is 5 times 5 is 25, and then times pi of 3.14, blah, 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 which will make it roughly 75. Will be more than 75, but just a little more than 75. So 78, yep. And then we get to create our message. So step over that, generate our message. Notice now our message is the radius is 5 and the area of the circle is 78.53975, just like before. Again, we get the area in here for creating The radius here got added and concatenated to our message variable just like before. And then that got added on to our message variable for the area of the circle is. And that got added on to area. We got the information from the area variable and the radius variable. Okay, and then the JOption pane.show message dialog is going to display this message to the screen graphically. Okay, cool. So if I step over this, it's going to display it. Boom, and we get the radius is 5.0. The area of the circle is 78.53975. So again, this is why I wanted to use this null here, because it's automatically centered it on the screen and put it exactly where I'm going to want it. It's just a message pop-up. And that is how we can do our message input dialogues, and also how to do a graphical pop-up message for the displaying it. So now you know how, and this graphical program we made will run on Windows, will run on Linux, will run on the Mac, will run on all these different platforms. So this is really cool about Java. You can do that very easily. You can just take the same code and run it everywhere. Same thing goes for a command line too. So with that, that covers how to do input and output inside of Java, both text-based and graphically. And my name is Nate Nestler, and this is for Hyperactive Studios, and I hope you learned a lot. Thank you very much.